Welcome guys, and in this slide we'll be discussing about props. Working with components necessitates passing data from one component to the next, or from parent to child components, in order to avoid data loss basically. Now props are provided by React and allow us to pass data around, but note the following things you have to bear in mind while trying to utilize props. Number one, on the parent component, you have to get the data you want to give to the child readily available. Okay. Now give the data a name and place it within the component's curly braces. That is the app, the function app. Now to accept props in the child component, you'd need to destructure the component in your props parameter. We'll get to see that in a moment. In the event of an array supplied as a prop, we will need to map across the data for us to render it, just like we did in our previous classes of rendering lists. Here, we have the app.js file where we imported the blog into our app.js file. We created an attribute, which is what we are going to destructure later on in our blog.js component. Now we are passing this array of blogs, which is what I said in number one, that I should get the data ready. We are passing the blogs inside of these curly braces here. Okay, now notice where I kept this particular array inside of the components curly braces, like I said. Now I'm passing the whole of this array as an attribute, as a property, props, inside of our blogs.list. Now moving over to our blogs.js component, we get to destructure the blogs.list that we used here. We get to destructure it from the props, as we are passing the props as an argument in the blog.js component. Now once we destructure it, we now have access to the entire array of blogs. So at every interval that we're looping through the blog.list, which currently is the blogs array, we have access to each of the elements here. And with that, we are calling blog.id, blog.name, blog.content to render the necessary elements to our screen. And currently, we are only having an on-click functionality that does nothing. Okay, but in the next few slides, we'll learn how to include the delete functionality. So we'll be able to delete a blog from our code. Now, running this particular application shows us this on our browser, where the delete button currently does nothing. Over here, we are going to learn how to include the delete blog function, so we'll be able to also pass the function as a prop. In this slide, you'd learn you can also pass not just arrays or data, you can also pass functions as a property or props to your child component. So with this, we get to declare our function const delete blog, which is expecting an ID, which is going to be bubbled back from the child. Now, once we receive this ID, we are going to loop through the blogs array here. We'll filter through it, and any blog ID that does not match, which is not equal to the current ID, is going to return it. Meaning that if we call the delete blog in our child component, we are going to pass the blog ID. So when the blog ID gets to this section, it's going to be checked if it tallies with any element here, any element ID here. If it does, we remove it. We only get to return the blog element that does not match with the ID we are bubbling back to our delete blog. And with that, we're only going to console.log the new blogs, meaning the new blogs are going to be the blogs that are left, or the blog that does not match the ID we are getting. So passing this delete blog in our child component, we also need to destructure it in our blogs.js file, where upon destructuring, we can now pass it into our delete function here. Okay, now since we have access to the blog.id, blog.name, blog.content, we also have blog.id, as that is what we are going to pass to our delete blog, which bubbles back to this function and carries out the function for us. Now, rendering this on our web page, we'll get to see that once you click on this, it gets to delete the React.js and leaving us with the Alida School blog post. In our next slide, we'll get to learn about React hooks and how to use React hooks. There are lots of React hooks, but in this particular course, we'll focus on the use state because it helps us to not just pass properties around or props around components, but globally declare our data so it can be accessible anywhere we want it in that particular component.